Around 2000 BC, a man named Abram packed everything he owned and walked away from one of the most sophisticated cities on Earth. Except the archaeology of that city suggests the timeline may be off by as much as 2 centuries, and nobody can quite agree on which direction to push it. So who exactly was this man? When did he actually live? And how did one family's wandering journey through deserts and foreign courts end up reshaping 3 of the world's great religions? That question is older than most of the civilizations we have names for, and the further you dig into it, the stranger and richer the story becomes. Abraham, the figure known by that name in the Bible, the Quran, and centuries of Jewish tradition, is not just a religious patriarch. He is a historical puzzle, wrapped inside a family drama, wrapped inside one of the most remarkable migration stories the ancient world ever produced. Tonight we are going to follow him every step of the way, from a thriving city in Mesopotamia, through the courts of Egyptian pharaohs, across the burning landscapes of Canaan, all the way to a mountaintop moment that still haunts the imagination of billions of people. And we will not skip the hard parts, the family betrayals, the impossible demands, the wives and concubines and sons whose stories most people never hear past the Sunday school version. Because what happened to Abraham and his family is not a simple triumph. It is a story full of wrong turns, long silences, and questions the ancient texts themselves refuse to answer. Let us start at the beginning, which means starting in a city that most people have never thought much about, but probably should. In the land of ancient Mesopotamia, the region we now call southern Iraq, was not some dusty backwater. By the time Abram was born into a family there, was a jewel. It had soaring temple towers called ziggurats, complex trade networks that stretched from the Persian Gulf all the way to the mountains of Anatolia, a sophisticated writing system, and a merchant class that kept meticulous records on clay tablets. Think of it less like a primitive settlement and more like the Manhattan of its day, crowded, ambitious, cosmopolitan, and very, very full of other people's gods. The religion of was deeply polytheistic. The moon god Nana was the city's patron deity, and the priests who served that temple wielded serious political and economic power. Abram's father, a man named Terah, is described in the book of Genesis as a maker of idols, whether that means he was literally a craftsman who carved figurines, or whether it is a literary way of saying he was embedded in the old pagan religious system, scholars debate. But either way, the family Abram came from was not standing apart from that world. They were part of it. And then something changed. The book of Genesis tells us that Terah himself made the first move, that he gathered Abram's wife Sarai, and his grandson Lot, and set out from heading for the land of Canaan. But they stopped short. They settled in a place called Haran, far to the northwest, and stayed there until Terah died, at what the text describes as a very old age. Why did Terah stop? The text does not say. Was it the journey being harder than expected, or illness, or simply that Haran was comfortable enough? We do not know. But here is what strikes me every time I sit with this story. The calling that Abram eventually received, the divine command to leave and go to a land that would be shown to him, may not have been the first stirring of that impulse. It may have been the completion of something his father began but could not finish. There is something deeply human in that. A journey started by one generation, carried across the finish line by the next. The call, when it comes in the Genesis account, is blunt and extraordinary. Leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go. No map, no named destination, just go, and I will show you. In return, there is a promise, or a series of promises that build on each other across Abram's lifetime. He will become a great nation. His name will be made great, and through him, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. For a man who at this point has no children, and a wife the text already tells us is unable to conceive, that promise is either the most audacious hope imaginable or the cruelest possible joke. Abram, to his credit, goes anyway. He is 75 years old when he leaves Haran. He takes Sarai, he takes Lot, he takes their servants and their flocks, and he heads south into Canaan. Now, Canaan was not empty, it was full of other people, the Canaanites, various tribal groups, fortified cities, local kings. Abram moves through this landscape, setting up altars, receiving renewed promises, and keeping conspicuously to himself politically. He is a stranger, passing through land that has been promised to his descendants, not to him. That tension between the promise and the present reality runs like a current through every episode of his life. And then comes the first great detour, and it is a strange one. A famine hits Canaan, and Abram takes his household down to Egypt. Egypt at this period was already ancient by any standard. The pyramids at Giza had likely already been standing for centuries by the time Abram arrived, which is itself a remarkable thing to sit with for a moment. As they approach Egypt, Abram does something that has puzzled readers ever since. He tells Sarai to say she is his sister, not his wife. His reasoning, as the text gives it, is that the Egyptians will see how beautiful she is and kill him to take her. If she is his sister, he lives. It is not exactly a heroic moment. And sure enough, Sarai is taken into Pharaoh's household. Pharaoh treats Abram well because of her. Abram acquires livestock, servants, silver, gold. Then serious illness breaks out in Pharaoh's house. The text attributes it directly to Sarai's presence there, and Pharaoh figures out the truth. He confronts Abram with one of the driest reprimands in all of ancient literature. Why did you say she was your sister? Here is your wife. Take her and go. And just like that, Abram is escorted out of Egypt, enriched and embarrassed. The strange footnote to this episode, one that only becomes relevant much later, is that among the servants who joined Abram's household in Egypt, there was an Egyptian woman named Hagar. Remember that name. She will become one of the most consequential figures in the entire story. Back in Canaan, Abram and his nephew Lot find themselves in a familiar kind of problem, one that probably sounds very modern. They both have large flocks and herds. Their herdsmen are arguing over pasture and water. There is simply not enough room for both of them in the same area. Abram, in a gesture that says a great deal about his character, gives Lot first choice of the land. Take what you want, he says. If you go left, I will go right. If you go right, I will go left. Lot looks out over the Jordan Valley, sees that it is well watered and fertile. The text specifically compares it to Egypt, and he chooses it. He sets his tents near a city called Sodom. That choice will haunt him, but we will get to that. For now, Abram remains in Canaan, and God renews the promise again, this time with something like an ancient land grant. All the land you can see in every direction, north, south, east, west, that belongs to your descendants, who will be as countless as the dust of the earth. And Abram moves his tent to the oak trees of Mamre, near Hebron. He builds another altar. He settles in, and then the waiting begins. Long, quiet, faithful waiting for something that seems increasingly impossible, because Sarai still has no child, and the years are passing. This is where Sarai makes a decision that was not unusual by ancient Near Eastern custom, even if it produces some of the most tangled family dynamics in all of Scripture. She gives her Egyptian servant Hagar to Abram as a secondary wife, with the expectation that any child born from that union would be considered Sarai's. Hagar conceives almost immediately, and here is where the human texture of the story gets painfully real. The text says that once Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to look on Sarai with contempt, and Sarai, understandably, is furious. She blames Abram. Abram says, essentially, she is your servant. Do what you think is right. Sarai treats Hagar harshly enough that Hagar runs away into the desert, alone, pregnant, on the road to nowhere in particular. What happens next is one of the most overlooked moments in the entire Abraham narrative. Hagar, sitting by a spring in the wilderness, receives a visitation. She is told to go back. that she will bear a son named Ishmael, meaning something like God hears, and that her descendants through him will be too numerous to count. She is, by most readings, the first person in Genesis to receive such a promise directly, and she responds with a phrase that is quietly astonishing. She gives God a name, El Roi, the God who sees me. A runaway slave in the desert names the divine. She goes back. Ishmael is born. Abram is 86 years old. 13 more years pass. The text gives us almost nothing about those years. Then, when Abram is 99, everything accelerates at once. The covenant is renewed and formalized, and this time it comes with new names. Abram, exalted father, becomes Abraham, father of many nations. Sarai becomes Sarah. Circumcision is established as the physical sign of the covenant between Abraham and God and all their male descendants, and for the first time, the promise about a son is attached to Sarah by name. Sarah, who is 90 years old and has spent her entire life unable to conceive, will bear a son. He is to be named Isaac. Sarah, overhearing this inside the tent when 3 mysterious visitors arrive to deliver the news, laughs. It is a private, disbelieving laugh, the laugh of a woman who has waited too long to feel anything but dark amusement at the idea. She is noticed. She is asked why she laughed. She denies it because she is frightened. But the response she gets is the line that has echoed through centuries. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And if you want a moment that captures the entire emotional arc of Abraham's story in a single exchange, that might be it. The impossible promise, the honest human doubt, the quiet, firm insistence that it will happen anyway. But before Isaac arrives, there is the matter of Sodom. Those 3 mysterious visitors are on their way there, and Abraham knows what is coming. He does something remarkable. He argues with God about it. He negotiates. If there are 50 righteous people in the city, will you spare it? What about 45? 40? 30? 20? 10? He bargains God down, step by step, with the persistence of a market merchant who knows exactly what he is doing. It is one of the most startlingly bold passages in all of ancient religious literature. A man standing before the divine and pushing back, not in defiance, but in genuine moral concern for other people. The city is destroyed anyway. There are not 10 righteous people to be found. Lot escapes with his daughters. His wife, famously, looks back and does not make it. And Lot ends up in a cave in the mountains, which is where his story takes an even darker turn. But that is a story for another time. Isaac is born. Sarah laughs again, but this time the laughter is entirely different. It is joy, and she says so. Everyone who hears this will laugh with me, she says. And then, not long after, Hagar and Ishmael are sent away. Sarah insists on it, unwilling to see Ishmael share in Isaac's inheritance. Abraham is distressed. The text is clear about that. This is his son too. But he sends them out into the desert with bread and a skin of water. When the water runs out and Hagar thinks they are both about to die, she sets Ishmael under a bush and walks away because she cannot watch. And again, in the wilderness, a voice speaks to her. Water appears. They survive. Ishmael grows up in the desert, becomes an archer, and his mother finds him a wife from Egypt. His descendants become a great nation, just as promised. The Islamic tradition honors Ishmael as a patriarch in his own right, tracing the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad to him, a detail that gives this family rupture a significance that echoes across 14 centuries and billions of lives. Now, if you have been with Scholar Eli for a while, and you love digging into the deep layers of these ancient stories, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Consider subscribing and joining our growing community of history lovers who, like their past, served with a little depth and a lot of genuine mystery. But anyway, back to Abraham, because we have arrived at the moment most people know and most people misunderstand. The binding of Isaac, the Akedah, as it is called in Jewish tradition, is the climax of Abraham's story, and it is genuinely one of the most psychologically disturbing and philosophically rich episodes in any ancient text. God tells Abraham to take Isaac, his beloved son, to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. Abraham rises early in the morning. He does not argue this time, the way he argued over Sodom. He saddles his donkey, takes 2 servants, takes Isaac, and cuts the wood for the offering himself. 3 days of walking. Then he tells the servants to stay with the donkey. Then Isaac, carrying the wood, asks his father the question that cuts through everything. We have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham answers, God will provide the lamb, my son. Whether that is faith or deflection, or a father who does not yet know what he is going to do, the text leaves it entirely open. The knife is raised, and then it is stopped. A ram caught in a thicket by its horns is offered instead. Abraham names the place something like God will provide, or God will be seen. The promise is renewed one final time, more intensely than ever before, and they walk back down the mountain together. What Isaac felt about any of this, the text does not say. What their relationship was like afterward, the text barely says. But here is what we do know about the rest of the family's story. Sarah dies in Canaan at the age of 127, the only woman in the Hebrew Bible whose age at death is recorded, a detail that has struck commentators for centuries as quietly remarkable. Abraham mourns her, weeps for her, and then negotiates with the local Hittite landowners to purchase a field and a cave called Machpelah near Hebron. He pays full price, publicly, with witnesses. He buries Sarah there. It becomes the first piece of the promised land that Abraham actually owns outright. Later, Isaac would be buried there. Jacob and Leah. The cave at Machpelah, in the city now called Hebron, is still there. The site is venerated to this day. Abraham's final act as a father is to send his most trusted servant back to Mesopotamia, to his extended family still living there, to find a wife for Isaac from among his own people. The servant prays for a sign at a well, and the sign comes immediately in the form of a young woman named Rebekah, who is precisely who he was looking for. She agrees to go. Isaac marries her. He loves her, and the great family line continues. Abraham lives to 175. By the reckoning of Genesis, he takes another wife after Sarah, a woman named Keturah, and has more children by her, sending them east with gifts, away from Isaac, who inherits everything. When Abraham dies, it is Isaac and Ishmael together who bury him, brothers, reunited, at the cave of Machpelah, beside Sarah. That quiet reunion is one of the most moving details in the entire narrative, and it is easy to miss. 2 sons from 2 mothers, 2 futures, 1 grave. Whatever divided them in life, they stood together at the end. Here is what strikes me, stepping back from all of it. Abraham's story is not a story about perfection. He lies to Pharaoh. He makes mistakes as a father that ripple through generations. He waits so long for promises to materialize that even his wife laughs at the idea. And yet the tradition that grew from his life became the foundation for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, 3 faith communities that together include more than half the people on earth. 1 man, 1 family, 1 impossible journey from a city in Mesopotamia to a hillside in Canaan. The weight of that is difficult to hold in your mind all at once, and the historical questions are still alive. Archaeologists continue to dig at sites across the ancient Near East, turning up evidence of migrations, of pastoralist groups moving through Canaan, of names and customs that echo what the patriarchal narratives describe. Whether any of it confirms a specific historical Abraham, the field has not settled. Some scholars see the patriarchal stories as a much later literary composition, projecting earlier traditions backward. Others believe they preserve genuine historical memory in mythologized form. I cannot resolve that debate for you. Nobody can, not yet. But what I find most honest to say is this: the story is too specific, too psychologically real, too full of unflattering human detail to read like a simple myth invented to glorify a founder. The man who laughed at the wrong moment, who let his wife be taken into a foreign palace, who sent his son and that son's mother into the desert, who walked up a mountain with a knife in his hand. That is not the portrait a later tradition typically draws of its greatest hero. So what do you think? Do you believe there was a real Abraham behind the text? A historical figure whose actual life is buried under centuries of retelling? Or do you see the story as something else, a parable, a composite, a nation's way of understanding its own origins? I would genuinely love to hear where you land on that, so leave your thoughts down in the comments. Next time, we are going to follow Isaac, the child of the impossible promise, and see what kind of man he became and what happened to his family when his twin sons came of age and tore each other apart. It is a story that gets darker and stranger than most people expect. If questions like these are the kind of thing that keeps you up at night in the best possible way, this channel is your home. Subscribe, stay curious, and I will see you in the next one.